After years of tolerating her insults, my stepdaughter finally crossed the line, said I was just her mom's mistake. I stayed calm, but 2 weeks later, when she needed help with a down payment for her mortgage, the unexpected happened. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Daniel Hansen from London. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I met Elaine when I was 45, a few years after her husband died. She was elegant in a quiet, unassuming way, graceful without trying, the kind of woman who didn't have to speak loudly to be heard. We met at a fundraiser for a local hospital. I had just donated a fleet of trucks through my logistics company, and she was volunteering at the check-in table. Our conversation started with a joke about paper name tags and ended with dinner 2 nights later. By the third date, I knew I wanted to marry her. What I didn't fully understand, what I chose not to understand, was that I'd be marrying her grief too. And her daughter. Jenna was 17 when I came into their lives. I was hopeful, naive even, thinking maybe I could step in as a father figure. Instead, I walked straight into a storm that never let up. From the very beginning, Jenna made her boundaries clear. She never yelled. That would have been easier in some ways. Her disdain came in the form of quiet, calculated jabs, comments whispered just loud enough for me to hear, questions phrased to sound innocent but loaded with meaning. So, how long have you and mom been playing house? Or do you always insert yourself in family decisions? Or just when it involves money? Elaine brushed it off as teenage grief, but I saw the flicker of satisfaction in Jenna's eyes whenever her words landed. She didn't want a replacement. She wanted a void she could protect. I told myself to be patient. That time would soften her edges. That if I stayed kind, if I stayed steady, she'd eventually see I wasn't the enemy. I was wrong. For years, I tried to show her I cared. I never pushed to be called Dad. I attended her high school graduation, sat silently in the back row while her grandparents took the family photos. I wrote checks for her college tuition, co-signed on her first car, paid for a study abroad semester in Barcelona she never once thanked me for. Elaine always said, she appreciates it in her own way, but I knew better. I saw the way Jenna lit up when her father's name was mentioned, the way she clung to his memory like a lifeline. I never tried to erase him. I only ever tried to be something steady, something dependable. But no matter what I gave, she took it with clenched teeth and looked right through me. There was one night I remember clearer than the rest, her 23rd birthday. We threw a small dinner at the house. Elaine cooked, I grilled steaks, Jenna invited a few friends. Halfway through the evening, someone asked her what it was like having a stepfather. She raised her wine glass and, with that razor-edged smirk, said, "It's like leasing a car when you miss your old one. Gets the job done, but it's not yours." Her friends laughed. I didn't. I just excused myself and cleaned the dishes alone in the kitchen while they played charades. Elaine scolded her later, but gently, as if Jenna were a child, not a grown woman. I said nothing, because what was the point? Kindness had become a currency she refused to exchange. And still, I kept showing up. I think I stayed hopeful because part of me needed the story to end differently. I needed to believe that if I just worked hard enough, if I was consistent, fair, generous, that she'd eventually see me as something more than the man who married her mother. That she'd understand I didn't come into her life to replace anything, just to offer stability in a time of loss. But people don't always want stability. Sometimes, they want to stay in their anger. Jenna wore her grief like a badge, and I became the most convenient target. I stopped expecting her to call on Father's Day. I stopped waiting for gratitude. I kept giving because that's who I was. Until the day I wasn't. Looking back, I see how slow the erosion was. One insult here, one dismissal there. A decade of little paper cuts until I was too numb to feel the sting anymore. And the worst part? I blamed myself for most of it. Maybe I was too formal, too measured, not warm enough. I'm not the kind of man who hugs people at random or shares personal stories over beer. I manage a staff of 80 people across 2 states. I solve problems. I fix things. But I couldn't fix this. I couldn't make someone love me who had already decided I didn't belong. That fact used to haunt me. Now it just clarifies things. The truth hit me not in a moment of chaos, but in a moment of stillness. One evening, after another cold family dinner where Jenna ignored every word I said, I was sitting in my office, glass of bourbon in hand, my dog curled up by my feet. And it just clicked. I realized I didn't owe her anything more. Not my patience, not my forgiveness, not even my money. I had spent years auditioning for a role I was never going to get. I was done. That night, I drew an invisible line in my mind, a boundary. She didn't see it yet, but I had stepped off the stage. Elaine sensed something had shifted, but I didn't spell it out. There was no dramatic confrontation, no speech, just a quiet withdrawal. I became polite but distant, cordial but no longer invested. When Jenna made another one of her sideways comments during a Sunday visit, I didn't even blink. I didn't offer a lecture or try to reason with her. I just looked at my watch and left the room. I saw the flicker of confusion on her face, that brief moment when she realized I was no longer playing along. She had mocked my presence for years. Now, she was going to learn what my absence felt like. And still, I stayed quiet. Not out of cowardice, out of clarity. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't to fight. It's to stop feeding the fire. She thought I'd always be there, wallet open, nodding through the insults. But the thing about quiet men like me, we don't explode. We subtract ourselves. And when we do, people finally notice the silence. It happened on a Sunday. Ironic, really, given how much Elaine cherished the idea of family Sundays. She'd prepped the table like it was Thanksgiving, candles lit, fresh flowers, cloth napkins folded just right. The effort was sweet, but also exhausting. For years, I went along with it, not because I enjoyed the awkward silence or Jenna's half-hearted smiles, but because I loved Elaine. She needed to believe that her family could still gather without falling apart. And maybe, on some level, I wanted to believe that too. That we weren't just performing the idea of closeness. That one day, Jenna would come around. But that Sunday was different. There was a current in the air, sharp, buzzing, and cruel. I felt it as soon as she walked in. Jenna arrived wearing that overconfident smirk, the one she reserved for nights she knew she'd be the center of attention. She greeted her mother warmly, hugged her tightly, and then nodded at me like I was the hired help. "Hey, Richard," she said, dragging out my name just enough to make it sound like an insult. I gave her a polite nod back and pulled out her chair like I always did. Not because I respected her, but because I respected myself. I wasn't going to meet her pettiness with pettiness. I had too much dignity left to burn. Dinner started normally enough. Small talk, a few stories about her real estate search, something about a condo she liked in the city. Elaine was glowing, hanging on every word. She still saw Jenna as her baby girl. That illusion was her armor. I didn't fault her for it, but I knew what was coming. I'd seen this pattern before, Jenna buttering up the room before sinking the knife in. And sure enough, halfway through her second glass of wine, it started. First, a dig at the food. "This roast is charming," she said with a laugh, raising her eyebrows. "You trying something new, Mom?" Elaine laughed nervously, brushed it off. Then came the politics, something about how people who run logistics companies basically profit off underpaid labor. I didn't take the bait. I cut my meat, chewed slowly, kept my eyes on my plate. And then she went for it. "So," she said, looking right at me, "do you ever regret marrying into a family that didn't ask for you?" The table fell silent. Elaine's fork paused midair. I didn't look up, didn't move. Just waited. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I mean," she continued, "my mom was lonely, sure. But we all make mistakes, right?" Her voice was syrupy sweet, her smile wide and cruel. "Some mistakes just stick around longer than others." That was it. That was the line. I placed my knife down carefully, folded my napkin, and looked her dead in the eye. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was just done. "Well then," I said, standing slowly, my voice calm. "That mistake is done hosting dinner." I turned to Elaine, kissed her gently on the cheek, and walked out without another word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give Jenna the performance she wanted. I just left her there, mouth slightly open, fork in hand, realizing she had finally gone too far. I sat in my car for a long time afterward. Didn't turn on the radio. just stared at the dashboard, hands on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of 10 years settle into my chest. 10 years of trying. 10 years of quiet endurance. 10 years of swallowing my pride for the sake of a woman I loved and a daughter who never once gave me a chance. And in that moment, I wasn't sad. I wasn't even bitter. I felt clear. Clean. Like I had finally put down a burden I should have dropped a long time ago. Elaine called later that night. Her voice was tight, brittle. "You didn't have to leave like that," she said. She didn't mean it. I didn't argue. I just said, "I know what I heard." There was a long pause. "She's grieving," she whispered. "She's still grieving." That line again. The excuse that had become a leash. "She's 26, Elaine." I replied, my voice firmer than I intended. "She's not grieving. She's cruel. There's a difference." Another pause. Then silence. I could hear her breathing. I could feel the weight of her torn loyalties pressing through the phone. And I understood. She loved us both. But only one of us had made her choose. That week, I didn't speak to Jenna. I didn't return her texts, short, cold little messages like, "Dinner was intense," or "Didn't mean to upset you." No apologies. No acknowledgement of what she'd said. Just the passive-aggressive outreach of someone who knew she'd overstepped, but wasn't ready to own it. I ignored everyone. I went to work. I held meetings. I played with the dog. And I waited. Not for her to change. Just for her to realize that the rules had. By the weekend, Elaine was asking if I was going to come to brunch. I told her I had plans. I didn't. I just couldn't sit across from Jenna again, couldn't pretend like her words hadn't landed. Because they had. Not because they were true, but because they revealed the truth. She would never see me as anything but a placeholder. A checkbook. A mistake. And that truth, once seen, couldn't be unseen. On Sunday, I went for a long drive. I took the scenic route up along the ridge, windows down, wind in my hair. I didn't think about Jenna. I thought about dignity. About boundaries. About the difference between being kind and being complicit. I'd confused the two for too long. I thought that loving Elaine meant accepting abuse from her daughter. But love that requires self-erasure isn't love. It's martyrdom. And I was done dying on that hill. That night, I sat at my desk and opened a new folder. Labeled it Estate Planning. Began rethinking everything. Inheritance, company succession, power of attorney. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. If Jenna saw me as a mistake, she would no longer benefit from that mistake. The next time she came knocking, the door wouldn't swing open so easily. And if she ever wanted my respect again, she'd have to earn it. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came. I remember because I had just finished my second coffee, the one I allow myself after emails, but before meetings. The office was quiet, still early enough that the administrative staff hadn't filled the halls with their usual chatter and clacking heels. I was sitting in my corner office, reviewing a freight quote for a new client, when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen on my screen since the dinner incident. Jenna. I stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering over the green icon, before hitting decline. I wasn't interested in small talk or fake apologies. Whatever she had to say could wait, or better yet, go unsaid. Less than a minute later, a text came through. "Can we talk for a second? It's important." I didn't answer right away. I stared at the message, wondering what game she was playing now. Was it damage control? Guilt? Some thinly veiled attempt at reconciliation? But something about the wording felt different. Important. Jenna never used that word lightly. When she wanted something, she usually masked it with sarcasm or entitlement. This had a different temperature. So I waited until after lunch, when my schedule cleared, and called her back. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright and oddly warm, like she was trying too hard to sound casual. "Hey, Richard," she said, dragging out the vowels like we were old friends catching up after a vacation. I didn't humor her. "What's going on?" I asked, straight to the point. There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. "Okay, so, I'm buying a place. A condo. 2-bedroom, close to the city. It's kind of a big step, and I'm excited," but another pause. The kind people use when they're trying to line up their excuses. "I'm just short on the down payment. Not by much. Just like $25,000. I didn't say anything. I let the silence stretch, the kind of silence that forces people to fill it with their real intentions. Jenna cleared her throat. So I was wondering if you might, help out. Just until I get things finalized. And there it was. The real reason she'd called. The warmth, the laughter, the feigned friendliness. It all led to this. A request. A favor. A check. I felt no anger, just a cold clarity settling in my chest. She hadn't called to apologize. She hadn't called because she regretted what she said. She called because she needed something. Because despite everything, she still saw me as the man who'd open his wallet, no matter how many times she spit in my face. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, stared out the window at the trucks loading in the yard, and said, "Mistakes don't sign checks, Jenna." There was a pause. A long one. I imagined her blinking in confusion, waiting for me to explain the joke. But I didn't. "What?" she finally said, voice small, uncertain. "You said I was your mother's mistake," I replied evenly. "And mistakes don't sign checks." Another pause. Then, "Oh my God, you're serious." Her voice cracked at the edges. "That was weeks ago. I was just upset. People say things they don't mean." "You said exactly what you meant," I replied. "And now I mean what I say." I ended the call before she could respond. I wasn't interested in hearing her backpedal. I'd heard enough lies wrapped in apologies to last a lifetime. Over the next few days, she tried again. Texts, emails, a voicemail where her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. I shouldn't have said what I said. I was lashing out. I've been under a lot of stress. She didn't apologize for the insult. She apologized for the situation, as if her cruelty were an accidental byproduct of emotional turbulence, not a deliberate wound. And again, I saw through it. There was no remorse in her tone, just desperation. She needed the money, and I was the only one she could ask. But she hadn't changed. She just miscalculated how deep my line in the sand really was. Elaine, of course, found out. She brought it up over dinner, her voice careful, like she was trying not to trigger a landmine. "She's young," she said gently, "still learning how to handle things." I set down my fork. "She's 26. She's not learning. She's surviving by manipulation." Elaine flinched at that, but didn't disagree. She knew I was right. Still, the mother in her couldn't help but try. "Maybe this is a chance," she said. "Maybe if you help her, she'll finally start to see you differently." I looked at her for a long moment before responding. "I don't need her to see me differently. I need her to treat me differently. And that starts with earning what she asks for." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was conflicted, my decision was firm, but because I was beginning to see the years of quiet enabling for what they really were. Every time I paid for something without boundaries, every time I let her off the hook, I taught her that love came without accountability, that I would always be the safety net, no matter how cruel she was. And now, faced with a real consequence, she was scrambling, not to make things right, but to preserve the version of me she could exploit. That version no longer existed. The next morning, I drafted a formal offer. A job, entry level, secretary to my operations manager. $18 an hour, full benefits, 2-week probation period. I emailed it to her with a short message. "If you need money, come earn it." No signature, no soft language, just the facts. She didn't respond that day, or the next. But on the third day, she showed up at my office, lip gloss on, hair neat, wearing a button-down shirt I knew she'd borrowed from Elaine. She didn't speak much, just handed me the signed offer letter and nodded. I nodded back. No handshake, no welcome speech, just a quiet beginning to a very different relationship. And from that moment on, the rules had changed. When Jenna walked into the office that Monday morning, she didn't look like herself, and I don't mean that in a flattering or disparaging way. She looked unprepared, not in the literal sense. Her blouse was ironed, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her heels modest and clean. But there was something behind her eyes, a nervous flicker she couldn't quite mask, like someone who'd suddenly realized the game they were playing had real consequences. This wasn't brunch or a family gathering where she could coast on charm and thin smiles. This was my company, my rules. And for the first time in her life, Jenna had to walk through a door where her name held no privilege. I had already informed Diane, my operations manager, that we were bringing on a new secretary. I told her it was a personal arrangement, that the new hire would be treated like any other employee, no special treatment, no exceptions. Diane, a woman in her late 50s with the posture of a soldier and the patience of a saint, raised an eyebrow when I mentioned the last name. As in your Jenna? She asked. Yes, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She'll be reporting to you. Not to me. Diane nodded slowly, and without hesitation said, Understood. I didn't need to say more. Diane had worked with me for over a decade. She knew exactly what tone to strike and what boundaries not to cross. The first week was, in a word, illuminating. Jenna showed up on time every morning, but barely spoke. She sat at the corner desk outside Diane's office, clicking away on the outdated keyboard she had been assigned, sorting invoices, printing freight logs, and transferring calls. She had never held a job before, at least not one that required actual grunt work. Her internships in college were mostly vanity projects, arranged through her mother's connections. This was different. This was a desk in a fluorescent-lit hallway next to the break room. This was shared coffee, missed calls, and unreturned emails. This was real life, and it was wearing her down by the hour. At first, some of the younger staff whispered, Isn't she the boss's stepdaughter? Someone asked too loudly on her second day. Jenna heard it, of course. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. I watched the moment from my office, unseen behind a glass wall. Part of me wondered if she'd spin around and say something biting, something Jenna-like. But she didn't. She just kept typing, eyes fixed on the screen like her life depended on it. I'll admit, it surprised me. I had expected more attitude, more drama. But what I saw was something quieter, almost pitiable. Not quite humility, but something adjacent to it. Elaine asked me that Friday how she was doing. She's working, I said. That's a first. Elaine looked at me, concern pinching the corners of her eyes. Is this punishment? She asked softly. I paused, folding the evening paper in my lap. No, I said after a moment. It's the first opportunity she's had to earn something. Elaine didn't push back, but I could see the conflict in her. She didn't like seeing her daughter humbled, even if she knew Jenna needed it. But I had reached a point where coddling no longer interested me. If Jenna wanted to be treated like an adult, she had to behave like one. And adults don't get bailed out after spitting in the faces of those who support them. On the second Monday, Diane forwarded me an internal email Jenna had written, poorly formatted, full of grammar errors, and addressed to the wrong department. Diane didn't add any commentary, just the subject line, FYI. I read the email twice, then deleted it. I wasn't here to micromanage her performance. That was Diane's job. I wouldn't protect her, but I wouldn't sabotage her either. That was the promise I'd made to myself when I hired her. Equal footing, no more, no less. If she succeeded, it would be because she learned. If she failed, it would be on her own merit. Either outcome would teach her something, and maybe, just maybe, teach me that dignity didn't have to mean distance. Later that week, Jenna knocked on my office door for the first time since she started. I looked up, gestured for her to come in. She stood just inside the threshold, arms crossed tightly over her chest like she was bracing for impact. Diane said I could take my lunch early, she said quietly. I'm just letting you know. I nodded. Noted. She hesitated, looked like she wanted to say something more, but didn't. Just turned and walked out. No eye roll. No attitude. Just a hint of discomfort. I stared at the closed door for a long moment afterward, unsure how I felt. I wasn't proud. I wasn't vindicated. If anything, I felt steady, like the ground was finally level under my feet. But that steadiness didn't last. Not entirely. Because on Thursday, Diane caught me before I left. Thought you should know, she said, handing me her phone. It was a voicemail. From Jenna. A butt dial, probably. She had meant to call someone else. Her friend, maybe. But instead, she'd left a message on Diane's office line. I hit play. Her voice came through the speaker, sharp and brittle. I can't believe he made me take this job. Like I'm some desperate loser. He's getting off on this. I know he is. He's always been a petty little man in a big office. I swear, once I get what I need, I'm done with this bullshit. I handed the phone back without a word. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I felt nothing. Just a quiet confirmation of what I already knew. She wasn't there to grow. She was there to wait me out. To use the job as a temporary bridge to get what she wanted. The same pattern, playing out in a new theater. That night, I didn't tell Elaine. I didn't need to. This wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about strategy. Jenna thought she could game the system, that she could put in minimal effort and still cash in. But the rules had changed, and she was playing in my world now. She didn't know I heard the voicemail. That part gave me an edge I hadn't expected, not because I intended to retaliate, but because for once, I had the full picture while she thought she was still in control. It's a strange feeling, knowing someone's mask has slipped without them realizing it. Like watching a magician fumble a trick and thinking, so that's how it's done. The worst part of that voicemail wasn't what she said about me. God knows I've heard worse behind my back. It was what she revealed about herself. The calculation, the entitlement, the audacity to assume that she could still outmaneuver me, even after everything. That she thought I was weak enough to fall for another round of sugar-coated compliance. But I had reached a place where even her insults didn't sting anymore. They just confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't ready to change. She was just trying to survive long enough to escape accountability again. The next morning, I watched her from behind the glass as she arrived. 15 minutes early, coffee in hand, eyes trained forward. She moved like someone playing a role, trying not to miss her cues. She said good morning to the receptionist, kept her head down, and got to work. Most people would have admired the effort. But I had the voice recording fresh in my mind, and it colored everything she did in a different light. Every polite gesture became performance. Every thank you sounded rehearsed. The irony is, had she never left that voicemail, I might have started to believe she was growing. But now I knew better. She wasn't turning a corner. She was just walking in circles, waiting for the next handout to appear. Diane didn't mention the voicemail again, and neither did I. There was no point. Calling Jenna out would only give her a platform to lie, to spin, to weep and manipulate the narrative in her favor. No, the better punishment was silence. I kept everything exactly as it was. Let her clock in, do the work, get her paycheck like everyone else. No promotions, no private talks, no special favors. Let the weight of her own resentment drag her down day by day. People don't change through confrontation. They change when their old tricks stop working. And I was done reacting. That Friday, something shifted. It wasn't a grand gesture, more like a flicker. Jenna knocked on my door again, late afternoon, just as I was shutting down my computer. She stood in the doorway, holding a file folder, eyes not quite meeting mine. I finished sorting the invoices for Q3, she said, voice low. Thought you might want a review before Monday. I took the folder, nodded once, and waited. She lingered, as if hoping for a thank you, or at least some acknowledgement. I gave her neither, just opened the folder and flipped through the pages. Her work was fine, accurate, thorough, but I wasn't in the business of rewarding bare minimum effort, not anymore. She finally broke the silence. Do you really hate me that much? The question came out of nowhere, raw, shaky, and strangely genuine. I looked up slowly, met her eyes for the first time in days. There it was. Not defiance, not arrogance, but something else, hurt maybe, or confusion. I closed the folder and set it aside. No, I said calmly. I don't hate you. I've just stopped protecting you from consequences. She blinked, like she wasn't sure what that meant. You think this is punishment? She asked. Working here. I shook my head. No, I think it's a job. One you accepted. One you're doing fine at. That's all it is. She sat down across from me without asking, which surprised me. Her shoulders slumped slightly, tension bleeding into the chair. You don't think I'm trying? She asked, quieter now. Trying doesn't mean anything if the end goal is manipulation, I said. Trying means nothing if it's just about appearances. You want to be treated like an adult? Then act like one. Own your words. Stop playing the victim in a story you wrote. Her mouth opened, then closed again. No clever comebacks. No biting retort. Just silence. That was the first real moment we'd had in years. No performance, no act. Just two people sitting in a room, finally telling the truth. After she left, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction in putting her in her place. Just a quiet ache, like pressing on a bruise you forgot was there. I didn't want to fight her. I never had. I wanted her to respect me, to see me as someone who had stood beside her mother, who had paid for her education, her rent, her goddamn car. But respect given out of guilt or fear isn't real respect. It's just control. And I had no interest in controlling her. I just wanted peace. If that peace came from her distance, so be it. Over the weekend, I reviewed her progress file. Diane had logged positive notes, improvement in turnaround time, fewer formatting errors, punctuality consistent. I didn't smile. I didn't feel proud. But I did feel steady again. Not hopeful, not optimistic, just grounded. For the first time in a long while, I knew exactly where I stood. I wasn't trying to win Jenna over. I wasn't waiting for her approval. I was simply living my life, and she could choose whether or not to grow within it. But either way, I'd be fine. On Monday morning, something unexpected happened. I walked into my office to find a coffee cup waiting on my desk. Black, no cream, no sugar, just how I take it. No note, no explanation, just the cup. I looked out the window and saw her at her desk, typing, not looking up. I didn't say anything. I didn't acknowledge it. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't doubt the gesture. Maybe it was just coffee, or maybe it was something more. A small olive branch, a quiet beginning. I didn't let myself hope, but I let myself notice. That coffee cup became a pattern. Twice a week at first, then almost daily. Always plain black. Always placed on the corner of my desk before I arrived. No fanfare. She never mentioned it, and I never asked. It was the smallest gesture, but it said more than any apology could have. Not because of the coffee itself, but because of what it represented, effort without expectation. It didn't come with a request or a follow-up favor. It wasn't a performance. It was consistency. For the first time since she walked into my life, Jenna was doing something for someone else with no strings attached. And I let it be what it was, quiet, awkward progress. 3 weeks passed, and something in the office began to shift. Diane, who'd once regarded Jenna with mild suspicion, started giving her more responsibility. Not because I asked her to, but because Jenna had earned it. She was showing up, meeting deadlines, asking the right questions. There were no more complaints from other staff. The gossip had died down. And one afternoon, I heard her laughing, in the break room with 2 of the younger assistants. It was strange at first, hearing that sound. Like it didn't belong in the same building as all the tension that had come before. But it did belong. It was just new, unexpected, real. At home, Elaine noticed the change too. "She seems different," she said one night as we folded laundry. "I saw her help an elderly woman at the store last weekend. Just carried her bags without being asked." I nodded, but didn't respond. I wasn't ready to offer praise, not yet. But I did notice how Elaine said it. Like she was still trying to convince herself it wasn't just a phase. Like she didn't want to get her hopes up either. And I understood that. We'd both been burned by Jenna's behavior for so long. Trust had become a luxury we couldn't afford. But this time, I was letting her earn it. Not through words, but through action. The real test came 1 month into her employment. Jenna received a letter from her mortgage broker. An offer for a unit she loved had been accepted, but she still needed funds to secure the down payment. She brought the letter into my office and placed it gently on my desk. No dramatics. No pleading. Just a document and a quiet. "I know what I said before. I know how I treated you. I'm not asking for a handout. I just thought you should see this." Then she walked out. That was it. No sales pitch. No guilt trip. Just a presentation of need, delivered with something I hadn't seen in her before. Humility. I sat with that letter for an hour. Read it twice. Called the broker, confirmed the numbers. Everything checked out. She was close. Had saved most of it on her own through her paycheck and a small grant. She wasn't lying. She wasn't scheming. She was working for it. And in that moment, I had a choice. I could deny her again and protect myself completely. Or I could offer something new. Not forgiveness, not favor, but fairness. I took the letter home that night and laid it on the kitchen counter. Elaine saw it. Her eyes softened. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to let her sweat a little longer," I replied. Just enough to know that help isn't owed. 3 days later, I called her into my office. She stood straight, hands clasped, ready for disappointment. I slid a check across the desk, not the full amount, just enough to close the gap. "This is a loan," I said. "Interest-free. Pay it back within 18 months. I'll draft the agreement myself." Her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded, lips pressed into a thin, stunned line. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. That check wasn't a gesture of love or reconciliation. It was a transaction. One adult to another. Earned, not owed. The fallout from the past never disappeared. It lingered like smoke after a fire, subtle, clinging, impossible to fully clean. But in the months that followed, we learned how to coexist. Jenna stayed at the job, worked her way into more responsibility. I never promoted her. I never praised her publicly. But I also never undermined her. And she, in return, respected the boundaries I set. We weren't a family, not in the traditional sense. But we were no longer at war. And sometimes, that's enough. There was one moment, months later, that stuck with me. I was leaving the office late, briefcase in hand, when I passed her desk. She was still typing, focused, headphones in. I paused for a second, just watching. She looked up and removed one earbud. "What?" she asked, almost smiling. I shook my head. "Nothing. Just didn't expect you to be here this late." She shrugged. "Deadlines don't care about schedules." I nodded and turned to leave. As I reached the door, she added, "Thanks again. For the loan." I stopped but didn't turn around. "Just make sure you pay it back," I said. "I will," she replied. "I plan to." That was it. No big moment. No emotional hug. Just two people learning how to walk across a bridge they both burned and rebuilt. I no longer try to define our relationship. I don't call her my daughter. She doesn't call me dad. But there's a new kind of honesty between us. One built not on forced love, but on earned respect. I spent years giving unearned grace, thinking I could buy my way into a role that was never truly mine. What I've learned is that respect given too freely loses its value. Now, I protect my peace like a vault, and anyone who wants access to it has to come with clean hands. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do for someone you love is stop making things easy for them. This story isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries, growth, and the quiet power of walking away from manipulation. If you've ever been the mistake someone thought they could take for granted, I hope this reminded you that your worth is not up for negotiation. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, betrayal, and reclaiming your peace. See you soon in the next one.